opposing
I'm
theology.
making a historical claim that we don't have any evidence for a document that aligns well with Islamic doctrines.
Well, that within itself, that historical claim, in order to actually make that a historical claim, you'd have to know all the evidence that's available, or all the evidence that we do have. But before we
Assalamu
get there,
alaikum.
wa alaikum salam, Fawad.
Wa alaikum salam.
So if you're making a historical claim, and the reason why I asked is if you're making a historical claim, you have to put your doctrine or your theology. Your theology is not null and void, meaning your theology that you get from reading the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that is basically irrelevant, because now instead of you just focusing on the four Gospels, you have to look at every single gospel or quote unquote gospel that was there, regardless if it fits your beliefs or not. And unfortunately, since you don't necessarily know how many gospels were out there, nor do you know what do they say, you cannot be conclusive. You cannot say that there is no evidence that gospels align with Islamic
Well,
belief. Does that make sense?
I'm open if you can name one and we can kind of look at
Sure.
what it says.
I can do that. You want me to do
So-
that?
Yeah, and we can like get the
Okay.
text of the gospel up.
Perfect. What does Epiphanius say about the Gospel of Ebionites? This is your own church tradition actually talking.
The Ebionites, what does he say about it?
Yeah, I'm asking you. Do you know?
I do not know what he says.
Okay,
Got it.
so then why are you making claims about a topic that you haven't studied or looked enough into?
I'm like relatively sure that the gospel of the Ebionites contradicts Islamic belief.
Okay, what is the what about the, so first you said you don't even know what he says about them, which means you don't know, because pretty much everything that we know about Ebionites, it comes from Epiphanius among other church fathers, right? But he was the first one. So you made a claim that you don't even know what he says, yet you're claiming something about the Gospel of Ebionites. Isn't that ironic?
And the reason why anything is because we don't want to make an argument from silence or an argument from ignorance. When you make a conclusive argument by saying there is no evidence, that's an absolute statement. And in order to make a historical, even historically, if you want to say an absolute statement, you'd have to know. Not only would you have to be aware of every single one of the different gospels that has ever been written historically, but you'd also have to know what each and every single one of them say. And unfortunately, since you don't, you cannot say that there is no evidence.
But you can say, I've not seen, and you can say, I've not seen despite looking here, here, and here. And that gives us something to go on.
All right, well, yeah, well, I'll change my claim to I haven't seen any gospel that aligns well with Islamic doctrine and doesn't contradict it.
Fantastic. Okay. So yeah, now that seems like a more humble position, and we appreciate that, right?
I'm pretty sure I have a quote from the Gospel of the Ebionites that says Jesus is the Son. So
yeah, we can grant that, and you know that Ebionites, everything we know about them, we know about them from the enemies, right? And I can show you how the church fathers, they actually misquote, and they actually, this is not me saying, we can substantiate that. They have lied. Your New Testament actually lies left and right about the prophets and the Old Testament, right? So, and the church fathers, they had a knack of lying about the so-called heretics from their paradigm and, misrepresent them. So everything that we know about the Ebionites, we know them through the church fathers, who are their enemies. Point number one. Point number two.
The ones that wouldn't trust them.
Exactly. Point number two is what we know about the Ebionites, and this is what I wanted to get into, that there were mainly two groups. You have heard the claim that one of them actually believed that Jesus was crucified, correct? Yes.
I was under the impression that the Ebionites denied the crucifixion.
Okay, so exactly, so they actually claim that there was a group among them that believed in it, and there was another that actually did not believe in it, right? So, but let's go through one by one, right?
So what I want from you is just a gospel that
lines up with the Islamic perspective, right? Okay,
yes.
So in Islam, we believe in one God, right? We believe that Jesus, peace be upon him, he was a Messiah and a prophet, and he was not crucified, right? So, and we also believe in the Quran, it clearly says that the Old Testament or the Torah was corrupted, right? All of these I can show you from the Ebionites' writings. Tell me which one you want to see first. You believe that they believed in one God, right?
Yeah. Okay. And hold on.
Did they believe that Jesus was the Messiah and a prophet? They never said once that Jesus is God.
Did they say he was God's son?
Doesn't matter. We can get to that. First, let's go with the claims that I've made so far. Okay, we believe in one God, not a Trinity. Ebionites never believed in the Trinity. We don't see anything from their writings that they believe in the Trinity. They believe Jesus was not crucified and that the Torah was corrupted. 4 things I told you. All 4 of those. Do you agree or do you disagree? If you disagree, tell me which one you want to see. We can get to the Son of God part later.
I'll grant you all of that, and I'll
Okay,
believe.
perfect. Now let's get to the Son of God part, right?
Okay.
The Son of God from the Islamic paradigm, we do believe, our scholars, Ibn Taymiyyah and some of the classical Mufassirin, they have actually said that maybe this term could have been used by previous nations, but since it got misused over time, it would have been abrogated by the Quran, because and the Testament, that it's evident till this day. You guys have a very different understanding than the Jews. Why is it that the Quran actually does not talk about the Jews using this terminology? It is only about the Christians, because you guys actually misuse this term. You guys have taken it literal. Till this day, when we pin you guys down, we ask you that words have meanings. Throughout history, we have only understood this term as an either adoptive, which would be adoptive, metaphorical, and literal. A begotten, somebody that is born from your loins, right? Which one of these are you taking for Jesus? There's no clear answer. It becomes very obscure. This is why, and this is found in every single pagan religion out there. So if God saw fit that, okay, this is being misused, it is befitting of him, actually, and it is his right to say, don't use this term anymore. It's been misused. Just like the sacrificial system was misused. So just like Jeremiah in chapter 7, he says that they were not given these laws because the priests supposedly misused these things. Same thing with the serpent. What was the serpent that the bronze serpent, that was made at the time of Moses, right? So it had a purpose, but then over time it started getting misused, right? So then it was demolished by, I forget which king it was, King Hezekiah or one of them, right? Yeah. In Hosea chapter 2, why do you think God tells him that on that day you shall not call me Baal anymore?
It would be because Baal was the name associated with the pagans, obviously.
Right, but the word itself, it just means Lord. Why is God telling them, don't call me that anymore?
It means master.
Master. Master. Yeah.
I have a question. Do you guys believe Jesus was baptized?
No, can you answer this question first? Because I don't want us to go to 10 different topics.
No, I'll grant you that you're correct on this.
Okay, no, I don't need you to grant me for the sake of granting me, okay? I really want an answer, right? Can you answer this question to me? Why did God actually abrogate this particular name from being used?
How I have thought of it is that Allah just genuinely doesn't want people to call him a father because you're only a slave to Allah.
What are you talking about? I asked Baal. I'm asking about Baal.
I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about father, but anyway.
No.
But, okay, I'm sorry. So Baal was about just technically Baal just means Lord, but in the context, people were using it as a pagan name of a pagan.
Absolutely. So it was misused, right?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. And this is the reason we believe that this term was being misused by you Christians, because if I were to ask you today, do you believe that Jesus is the Son of God? You would say yes. That's exactly what you're arguing for. And if I were to ask you, what does that term mean? First of all, it's obscure. It's not clear, right? It's not being used how it was used by the Jews. Till this day, you guys don't use it in the same sense. And on top of that, you guys think that this is a divine title of some sort. All three of those things, Jews that carry the same tradition that you guys have borrowed the tradition from, they don't understand that way. And this is why. So there's a lot of wisdom behind why God Almighty mentions in the Quran that this term should not be used anymore, right?
So I was under the impression that you couldn't call you couldn't call Allah a father because you're nothing more than a servant of Allah.
No, but it's not because of that. It's not because it's the term has been misused, because we actually have a similar type of connotation in the word Rabb, right? Because if I were to ask you, what does this term mean, son? Not the way you guys take it for Jesus, right? So if you say that you believe as a Christian that you're a child of God, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So if I were to ask you, what does that mean?
I'm an adopted sense. I'm a child of God.
Yeah. Can you elaborate on that? What does that mean?
My relationship to God is like I have an extremely like intimate and close relationship with him, but that doesn't mean I'm divine in the sense that I believe Jesus was as the Son of God.
Perfect. I asked about you, not Jesus, right?
Yeah.
So
I was
it's
making a
basically like a
distinction.
caretaker. If I adopt a child, I'm taking care for that child, right? I'm loving him. I'm taking responsibility for that child, right?
Yeah.
Okay. We have those terms. You know, al-wadud, the most loving, Rab, a caretaker. There you go.
And
It has the same connotation.
And Fawad, by the way, and this is
Yes.
just, let's make things simple. Nathan, I don't know how old you are. You look pretty young, but I'm not gonna ask you if you have children or not. But if you, let's hypothetically, let's say his scenario is you have a couple of kids, right? If you have a couple of kids, and let's say you have 3 children, all of them are adolescents. They're 6, 7 years old, right? 5, 6, 7 years old, right? And then you give each of them, they want to do arts and crafts. You give them scissors, right? But then you see 2 out of those 3 kids start hurting themselves with the scissors, and they start using the scissors for everything except for arts and crafts. Are you not going to take the scissors away from them? You say, hey, you guys can't use it anymore because they started abusing it and hurting themselves with it. Aren't you going to take those scissors away from them?
Yeah.
Exactly, because you see that they're not responsible with that scissors. They're taking the scissors and they're doing things that are hurt themselves with that scissors, and they're deviating away from what that scissors is meant to be used for and understood as to use. So you, as a loving parent, are going to say, you know what, the best thing for my children, the best thing for you guys, since I have authority over you, in order for me to guide you, I need to remove this scissors away from you for your own good. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. It's the same mentality.
Okay. All right. Well,
Yeah. Go ahead, Nathan.
So Muslims reject that Jesus was baptized, right?
We don't reject that.
Oh, you don't? Okay.
No, it could have happened. Like, it doesn't, the Quran doesn't affirm it, because baptism, what does it mean? You know, I mean, it could have been some sort of wudu, you know, we do that till this day, evolution.
And
you
by the
know,
way, Nathan,
we believe that it
let us know.
purifies sins when you actually cleanse yourself before 5 times a day prayer. We do that, you know.
And Nathan, let us know if you have when you have 5 minutes left, because again, we haven't forgot your question. But let us know when you have 5 minutes left. In the meantime, you guys can go ahead.
This, like, the last thing is, do you guys believe the Holy Spirit descended in the form of a dove and entered into Jesus?
No, but see, those are trivial matters. First of all, I told you that those would not actually, so if you're going to point out that Ebionites said something like this, first of all, I would ask you, no, I want to see the gospel of Ebionites, not from the mouths of their enemies. Why did you burn? Why did your ancestors, why is it that your church fathers burned everything from Ebionites? Why can't I read it for myself and make sense of it? Because till this day, we see the Old Testament, a document that you Christians hold and the Jews hold, and we have different interpretations. Now imagine, where it is a completely heretical sect from your guys' perspective. Why can't I expect you guys to lie about them? For all I care, there's not a single thing that is coming out of the church fathers' mouths that is true about the Ebionites. I could argue for that, because one second. So what I would say is, let's look at the core doctrine instead of the trivial issues. This whole dove thing and him being baptized, it doesn't take you outside of the fold of Islam necessarily, right? What I would ask is, did they believe in the Trinity? Yes or no?
No, but
okay. Did they believe in the crucifixion, or at least a group of them?
No.
Did they believe blood through salvation?
No.
Salvation through blood. Sorry, salvation through blood.
No, but he.
Okay.
But,
and did they believe that the Torah was uncorrupted?
No.
Okay. Did they believe that Paul was a true apostle?
No.
Okay. Now let's compare the
By
Ebionites. Yes, go ahead.
But by the way, I do have like 5 minutes left.
Okay. And so now let's compare that to, let's compare Ebionites to Muslims. We believe Paul was not a true apostle. He did away with the law, which the Ebionites said that the law was never done away with. They did not believe in Trinity. We don't believe in the Trinity. The Quran rejects that, right? They believe that Jesus was not crucified. We believe Jesus was not crucified. They believe that the Torah was corrupted. We believe the Torah was corrupted.
Yeah,
SubhanAllah, like if you were to line up, sorry,
they also reject the virgin birth.
No. So again, a group of them, not all of them. This is why I said, my brother, please don't make claims that you actually hear. So look, I've already refuted you on so many things. You're doing the exact same thing that I told you in the beginning not to do.
No,
right?
that's from the
I can show you. Sorry?
I believe the rejection of the virgin birth is from the fragments of the Gospel of Ebionite that we have.
No. So this is, again, a group of them. Again, so according to Epiphanius, and I can actually, you said you only have 5 minutes. If not, I could have actually showed you a quotation from one of the church fathers I think it's Eusebius that actually mentions this.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. So the conversation that you guys just witnessed between myself and Nathan, so right before this conversation that I had with him, I had spoken to him on Dawah about an hour earlier. Some of you may recall that. And I had very limited time to speak on there as the brothers were closing up. Nathan and I, we left the conversation on Dawah with his claim that there were no earlier gospels in circulation besides what they have today, or then he switched the goalpost, or maybe I misheard him. I don't know. There were no gospels or any earlier groups that had their own scriptures that had any doctrines that would line up with the Islamic perspective. So this was a claim that I would have loved to get into, but since they were closing up, so I invited him to Dots Connected to Islam. And when he got on there, somehow he, was in a hurry. That's fine. In fairness to him, he did mention that he had to leave earlier. He didn't have too much time. But it was very unfortunate because I wanted to show him how one of the earliest sects of Christianity, the Ebionites, they would have had, their own version of the Gospels, or a gospel, according to Epiphanius, Saint Epiphanius, which we'll see in a minute. And everything that they believed would go completely against the core doctrines of Christianity and would line up perfectly with the Islamic doctrine. So let's take a look at what the scholars and church fathers have said about Ebionites. Just a caveat, you guys must remember that whatever we know about these earlier so-called heretical sects from the perspective of the Orthodoxy, we know very little. We know that they burned everything from these heretical sects. We don't know much about them. Whatever we do know is through the hands of their enemies. So, which is exactly what Britannica over here says in the first quote that you guys see on your screen. Little information exists on Ebionites, and the surviving accounts are subject to considerable debate since they're uniformly derived from the Ebionites' opponents. Then we have William J. Cook Jr., and he's quoting a scholar, Petri, I think, Luminen, that's his name is. And he says, the memory of the Ebionites remains alive through descriptions of them in the works of others, actually those who were their opponents. According to Luminen, the Ebionites and the Nazarenes are known only from the writings of the church fathers, who present short summaries of their teachings and quotations from their writings, usually in order to confute what they consider to be a heresy. Thus, whatever is now known about Ebionites necessarily must be considered to have been filtered through a negative lens. So, what did Ebionites believe? Ebionites rejected all of the core doctrines of Christianity as they have them ever since the Council of Nicaea, at least. They rejected the Trinity. They denied salvation through blood. There are no such teachings that are found in their so-called gospel that the early church fathers quote from them, where we can get this idea that they believed in salvation through blood. As a matter of fact, they detested that. They rejected that completely. They rejected the divinity of Jesus or any type of pre-existence associated with the man named Jesus. They considered Paul an apostate and rejected his teachings completely. They denied the crucifixion or the suffering of the Christ. All of these actually are unanimously denied by the Quran and the Islamic standpoint. What did they believe would be closely associated or aligned with the Islamic position? They believed in Tawheed. They believed in one God. They believed that Jesus was a mere man, a revered prophet, and the Messiah. They believed that Paul was an apostate from the prophet, and they rejected him completely. They affirmed the virgin birth, although some of the missionaries would have us believe that they rejected the virgin birth, and this is partially true. And they're a gullible audience that are not very well read. They don't know that there was a sect among them that actually affirmed it, which we'll see in some of the upcoming quotations. They believed that the Torah had been corrupted and Jesus came to restore it, exactly how the Quran mentions in chapter 2, chapter 4, chapter 3, and several other passages, chapter 5. Now, what did they believe about the Torah? Let's look at some specific quotations. So, Petri Luminen, in his book, Recovering Jewish Christian Sects and Gospels, he discusses the Ebionites' view on the Hebrew Scriptures, particularly the Torah. He references early church father Epiphanius, who reported that Ebionites did not accept the Pentateuch in its entirety and rejected certain sayings. Keith Ackers, in his book called The Lost Religion of Jesus, he says this under the heading, Jesus is the true prophet. To the Ebionites, Jesus did not come to abolish the law. Rather, he came to teach his followers how to obey the law more carefully. It is also important to recognize that the Ebionites would have thought that Jesus' teaching role in relation to the law was especially important, as they contended the writings of the Pentateuch had been corrupted and did not represent the true law of God. He would have restored the forgotten laws received on Mount Sinai for God's people. Now, this reminds me, subhanAllah, perfectly of the Quranic narrative, that they corrupted these books, and Isa alayhi salam, he was taught by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Torah and the Injil. If it was not corrupted, why would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala need to teach him? Now, what about what type of scriptures did they have? So according to Saint Epiphanius, he mentions in his book, the Panorain, but I shall resume the thread of my argument against Ebion, meaning Ebionites, because of the gospel according to the Matthew course of the discussion obliged me to insert the whole of the knowledge which I had gained. Now, in what they call gospel according to Matthew, though it is not the entire gospel, but is corrupt and mutilated, and they call this thing Hebrew, the following passage is found. There was a certain man named Jesus, and he was about 30 years of age, who chose us. And coming to Capernaum, he entered in the house of Simon, surnamed Peter, and opened his mouth. Now, this is according to Saint Epiphanius, who considered them heretics. And he's saying, oh, they had their own version of Matthew. But again, we have to take this, at face value, since we don't have that gospel to view for ourselves, to examine it ourselves, like what type of correlation, what type of similarities it had with the Gospel of Matthew. What exactly does he mean when he says that it is mutilated, or they had their own version of Gospel of Matthew? Who knows? Maybe what they refer to as the Gospel of Matthew was actually copied from that, and it was this current version is actually would be considered mutilated in that case, right? And all of those things that Christians believe about Jesus, and the passion narrative, and Jesus being divine, or whether or not he was considered ontologically equal to the Father or not, but we clearly see that they denied all of these things. So again, it's just from his perspective. We don't know exactly what they had, right? We just have to go by face value. We have to take his word for it, right? And what about accepting Jesus' virgin birth? As I mentioned previously, that some of the Christian missionaries, they love to point this out to Muslims or their gullible audience. Oh, Ebionites, they did not accept the virgin birth. Again, a red herring. They would rather us focus on something trivial in this case, right? Because sure, according to Christians, this may be an important thing, but I think the more important distinction between them and the Christians would be the fact that they completely denied Trinity, the salvation through blood, the pre-existence of Jesus. Those would be more important things, right? So Catholic Encyclopedia, Volume 5, quotes Professor John Arenzen from the early 20th century, saying this: some Ebionites accept, but others reject the virginal birth of Christ, though all reject his pre-existence and his divinity. So we clearly see over here that he's quoting, by the way, from Origen's homilies, that all of the Ebionites, all of their sects, they definitively rejected the pre-existence and the divinity of Jesus, right? But there were, however, division among them in regards to whether or not Jesus was born of a virgin, right? Then we see another quote, or the same professor, by the way, he's mentioning Saint Epiphanius, and he says that Saint Epiphanius calls the more heretical section or sect Ebionites, and the more Catholic-minded Nazarenes. But we do not know whence Saint Epiphanius obtained his information, or how far reliable his information is, which means the very person that we get the bulk of our information about, the Ebionites himself, or Ebionites himself, doesn't give us definitive information about them. So in other words, take it with a grain of salt, because we don't know how reliable he himself is, because he doesn't tell us where he's getting this information from. So it's just his opinion, right? And as I mentioned previously, the church pretty much burned everything from these heretical sects. We don't know anything about them. All we do know about them is through the hands of through the lens of their enemies. Then, continuing with the acceptance of Jesus' virgin birth and denying his divinity, we see this clearly in Eusebius's book, The Heresy of the Ebionites, under chapter 27. He says, "For the Ebionites considered him, i.e. Jesus, a plain and common man, who was justified only because of superior virtue and was the fruit of the intercourse of a man with Mary. There were others, however, besides them that were of the same name, but avoided the strange and absurd beliefs of the former and did not deny the Lord was born of a virgin and of the Holy Spirit. But nevertheless, inasmuch as they also refused to acknowledge that he pre-existed, being God, Word, and wisdom, they turned aside into the impiety of the former, especially when they, like them, endeavored to observe strictly the bodily worship of the law. So we clearly see over here that they did continue following the Mosaic law. These men, moreover, thought that it was necessary to reject all the epistles of the apostle, referring to Apostle Paul, whom they called an apostate from the law, and they used only the so-called gospel according to the Hebrews, and made a small account of the rest. Then the last one from Origen, in his book Contra Celsum, book 5, chapter 61. He says this: "Let it be admitted, moreover, that there are some who accept Jesus and who boast on that account of being Christians, and yet would regulate their lives like the Jewish multitude in accordance with the Jewish law. And these are twofold sect of Ebionites who either acknowledge with us that Jesus was born of a virgin, or deny this and maintain that he was begotten like other human beings." Then, some of the similar quotations from one of the previous slides that I showed you, the rejection of Apostle Paul and adherence to the Mosaic law by Eusebius and Origen. You guys can clearly see that over here. Then what about crucifixion? So again, there's almost no passion narrative that we can find in their works. And Irenaeus against heresies, book 1, chapter 26, says this: "Moreover, after his baptism, Christ descended upon him in the form of a dove from the supreme ruler, and that then he proclaimed the unknown Father and performed miracles. But at last Christ departed from Jesus, and that then Jesus suffered and rose again, while Christ remained impassible and as much as he was a spiritual being." Now, this clearly implies that they believed that the actual person of Christ did not suffer or die, effectively denying the crucifixion or its significance, as Christians would at least believe. So there was, whatever they believed happened, in that discourse. There was a miracle, or whatever happened, but the Christ part of Jesus actually did not suffer. He was risen up before that. And I know that Christians might be jumping up and down and saying, "There you go, it says the Father," But yeah, but how did they understand this term Father? Did they understand it as Jews believe it, or even believed it back then, right? Because Jews use this term, but they mean it very differently. They mean it. They understand it in a metaphorical sense, that Father is or God is their Father, as in He is their caretaker, which would be a similar connotation of the word Rabb that we have, right? And the Quran actually abrogates that because it started being misused by Christians. So perhaps if Christians had not started associating deity to this word Son of God term, who knows? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his wisdom may have continued letting us use this term. But since it got Hellenized and misused, and the whole paganism aspect, came in from the Christians, that's why probably God Almighty in his ultimate wisdom abrogated this particular term to be used. So yeah, I guess that would be it for this video. Hopefully you guys learned something new, and like, share, subscribe, and let me know if you guys have any questions.